And hit record, and I'm going to switch over to share my screen, and we will get started. So here we go. Does grammar even matter? Yes, grammar does matter, and we talked about that in our very first meeting this semester, that or maybe, you know what, maybe in our composition class, I didn't focus on it as much as I do in, for instance, a professional writing class. But your grammar really does matter because it makes an impression on the reader. Even most of us who aren't very good at using grammar ourselves can recognize bad grammar in other writing, and it leaves a bad impression of the writer's capability and sometimes even, unfortunately, the writer's intelligence. So we do want all of our T's to be crossed and our I's to be dotted, so to say. We want all the nuts and bolts to be in place so that we are not leaving a bad impression. So that being said, some of the most common nuts and bolts that cause problems are commas and semicolons. So the very first huge mistake that I see over and over and over again, I think I would say in 95% of student papers, I see an issue with comma splices. And a lot of people have heard of a comma splice and they know that a comma splice is a bad thing, but they don't know what it is and they don't know why it's bad. So first and foremost, splice, even though it's a word that sounds like slice, which means to cut and disconnect, the word splice actually means to connect. So a comma splice then is connecting two full sentences with a comma. And that's against the rules. You cannot connect two full sentences with a comma. There's some other ways to put two full sentences together. And I'm going to show you what those are. So here's an example of a comma splice. And again, this is something that is wrong and you can't do. So when I'm writing, I like to use commas, comma. I'm not sure why. So you can see that there's two full sentences on either side of the comma. When I'm writing, I like to use commas. I'm not sure why. Those are both full sentences and they're hooked up together with the comma. In order to solve this grammatical error, you have three different options. The first one is to add that little word but, and the word but is considered a fanboy. So we've got a series of words that we can use and place after a comma to connect two full sentences, and then we have a correct compound sentence. So fanboys is this acronym, and the words that you can use after a comma to connect the sentences are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So you can use whichever one of those words is most appropriate to follow the comma. So the correction then is, when I'm writing, I like to use commas, comma, but I'm not sure why. It's such a small change, but it makes the sentence grammatically correct. A second option for correcting a comma splice is to replace the comma with a period. Just separate the two full sentences. And then your third option for correcting a comma splice is to use a semicolon. So a semicolon and a period function very, very similarly. And again, it corrects the error of the comma splice. Any questions about this screen or comma splices?
No.
Okay. Excuse me. All right, so another, I guess I would call this a common error as well. But it's something that typically you learn like in grade school, is that you should use commas to break up a list of 3 or more items. So very simple sentence here. John has a dog, cat, and a gerbil. So what I see a lot of times is this comma here being placed, but then this comma here is missing. And there are two schools of thought on whether the second comma or the last comma before and, like if we had 5 items in the series, there'd be a comma before and. There's different schools of thought, like I said, on whether or not that's necessary. We call this last comma before and the Oxford comma, and it is correct. In formal writing, the Oxford comma is considered to be correct usage. That being said, if you don't use it, you can't really like be marked off for it. Like if you have a teacher who red lines every little error and deducts points or something, you can make an argument that it's not required, because in APA style writing, medical writing, and like scientifically driven research, they often cut that comma out. And in newspapers and anything where words or copy is limited, like there's a word count or they're trying to squeeze in as much as they can within a certain space, they will eliminate that comma, because eliminating 100 of them throughout a newspaper makes more space for pictures and other words. So there are people who don't use that Oxford comma, but my recommendation to you guys in your academic career is to always use that last comma as the series in a list. Okay, so I switched screens. It looks very, very similar, but you can see up at the top, I moved on from listing commas to bracketing commas. So we want to use a comma to bracket or to set off what we would call an interrupting phrase. So in the sample here, it says, my father, comma, who hated baseball, comma, refused to come to my games. So you can see that the commas are offsetting or setting off or bracketing in this little phrase, who hated baseball. The way that you know if you should place commas around a phrase like this is that you should be able to take this phrase and remove it from the sentence completely, and the sentence still reads well. My father refused to come to my games. That's a good sentence. It doesn't offer as much detail or explanation, but my father refused to come to my games is in fact a full correct sentence. So when you're adding in a little bit of extra information that is not required for the sentence to be grammatically correct, you offset that phrase with a comma before and after it. When you read a sentence like this out loud, you can hear how the commas make a difference. And I'm going to talk about this at the very end, but reading aloud 4 commas is one really good way to figure out where commas go or don't go. So I'm going to read this with the commas. My father, who hated baseball, refused to come to my games. So there's that brief pause where the commas are, and you can just hear that the commas should be there. Without the brief pause, it would be, my father who hated baseball refused to come to my games. And that doesn't sound right. That's not how we would talk. So we use commas in a way to help with the flow of a sentence as well. Any questions about this one? Okay, I'm moving on. Again, this slide looks the same, but I did change the slide. So we're now on introductory commas. And this is really similar to the last one where we looked at the bracketing commas, except this time we're looking at an introductory phrase. So there's only one comma because the phrase is at the beginning of the sentence. So we're only using the comma to set it off after the phrase. In this case, according to my teacher, I only need one comma in this sentence. So just like with the interrupting phrase, an introductory phrase can be completely cut from the sentence and the sentence still makes sense. So if we were to delete, according to my teacher, we have, I only need one comma in this sentence, which is a good sentence. That means that this is an introductory phrase and it needs a comma to separate it from the rest of the sentence. This one's pretty simple. Any questions about this one? All right. So we will move on to the next slide. And this is what I was talking about in terms of listening for commas. If you feel confused by a comma, or you're trying to look up the rule, or you just don't care enough to look up the rule, when you read a sentence out loud and pause slightly where you've placed your commas, it should sound right. If you read the sentence out loud and you find yourself naturally wanting to pause and there's no comma, chances are you need a comma. So that's a really good way to, like, most of us are either crazy about commas and we use way too many of them, or we are afraid of them and so we hardly use any. Most of us fall pretty solidly in one camp or the other. Reading your own work out loud is going to shed some light on which person you are and how you need to either filter in those commas or how you need to start phasing them out. When you're doing this as an exercise or as a proofreading technique, make sure that you follow the rules. Do not pause if there isn't a comma. That's how you hear if the sentence sounds bad. Or if you, again, if you feel the need to pause, go ahead and just type that comma right in, read the sentence again with the pause, and see if that sounds better. And this last sentence is pretty much what I just said. Just make sure you're reading. So the first technique is to literally read what's on the page without pausing if there isn't a comma, or pausing when there is a comma. And the second technique is to read everything out loud in the way it sounds most natural, and then place the commas where you've paused and delete them where you haven't. Any questions about this? All righty. Last but not least, on commas, if you have a comma question, even if it's just like, here's a sentence, I don't know if there should be a comma, just send it to me. You can email it to me, or you can email me a whole paragraph and say, hey, can you take a look at my commas? And I'm happy to kind of do these little exercises with you to help you recognize how your comma usage is working out. So don't hesitate or be shy to ask me to do that kind of stuff. All right, moving on to the next grammatical discussion. This is another one that I don't see a whole lot of usage of semicolons, which I think is because people don't know how to use them. And when I do see usage of semicolons, it's almost always wrong. So that's why I chose it for one of our first meetings. We can go ahead and address it. So we've got my cute little cartoon with the colon asking the semicolon why he's crying, and it's because no one understands how to use him. And as I said, that is often the case. So we'll start with colons actually, because they are the simplest. Colons are used to introduce a list. That's their primary usage. So as an example, we covered many of the fundamentals in our writing class: colon, grammar, punctuation, style, and voice. So it's self-explanatory. I introduced a list, and before the list, I put the colon. Another example, my roommate gave me the things I needed most: colon, companionship, and quiet. So it doesn't have to be a list of 3 or more. It could be a list of one thing. So you're just anytime you're like introducing a word, or you're trying to put something out there as like, this is my example, colon, and then you can place the item after it. Other than this particular use, of course, we see colons when we're putting the time onto a piece of paper. And that's really it, guys. Like, colons are not very common in academic writing. They're a little bit more common like in professional or business writing. But if you are a person who's using colons all the time, you are very likely misusing them badly. So really think about using them the next time that you are so inclined to do so. Semicolons, on the other hand, have 2 uses. So we saw earlier in one of the comma slides that we can join together 2 full sentences that are related, and we can use the semicolon instead of a period. Why would we do that, you ask? It's just a technique to, I guess we could say like a period is a hard pause, like it's a firm ending to a sentence. A comma is the softest kind of pause within a sentence, and a semicolon is like somewhere in the middle. So sometimes it's just about variation in the flow of your writing. Like we talked about varying sentence lengths. Well, we can use a semicolon if we tend to write very short, choppy sentences. We can put them together with a semicolon to get a much longer sentence. So there's never really an actual need to use a semicolon. It's a matter of preference. It's a matter of style and adding variability into your sentence patterns. So here's an example of how it could work. Reddit is an interesting social media platform, semicolon. I didn't realize how diverse it was. So you can see the 2 sentences are each a full sentence, and they're related to each other. So the it here at the end of the second part of the sentence is referring back to Reddit, right? So I've stayed on topic, and I'm very connected in terms of what these sentences are talking about. You would not want to use a semicolon if the 2 sentences are not super connected. So in this example, Reddit is an interesting social media platform, semicolon. All social media should be monitored by the government. Like, they're kind of connected because Reddit is social media, but saying that Reddit is interesting and then making a general sweeping statement about all social media should be monitored by the government, like, they're not really connected statements at all. So you would not want to use a semicolon. You could use a period, and then maybe if your paragraph is appropriately structured, you could transition into that new topic, but we would not connect sentences that aren't I would say intimately related, like they need to be siblings, the two sentences, not cousins, not distant relatives, not step siblings, but actual siblings in order to connect them with the semicolon. Questions about that? Okay, one other use for semicolons, and this one is very little known, I have found. But if we have got items in a list that are more complicated than just like, the previous example was John has a dog, cat, and gerbil. So those dog, cat, gerbil, they're one word, very simple items in a list. If our list is more descriptive and the items in the list are more complicated, then we're going to find that we need commas within the individual items. So it doesn't work well to use a comma to separate the items in a list. When that's the case, you can use a semicolon instead. So in this example, I bought shiny ripe apples, semicolon, small sweet juicy grapes, semicolon, and firm pears. So you can see the commas here are being used to separate the descriptive adjectives that are describing the nouns, but then the semicolons are being used in between apples, grapes, and pears. So they're separating the actual nouns in the list. And we have a little bonus here, dashes / hyphens that I want to talk about really quick. So, you know what, to be honest, I'm using the wrong word. It should be hyphens, because dashes refer to something else, and I will tell you what that is. Well, a dash is used numerically, so I'll add that in here. It's for numbers. So we would say like 40 through 45. So a dash is just one keystroke of this, right? It's up by your plus button, and it means through, and we typically see it numerically. A hyphen, on the other hand, is used, well, it's almost never required. And I'm not talking about hyphenating words, right? I'm not talking about like when you have a compound word that you need to hyphenate, like I am well prepared to take this test, when we would hyphenate well prepared. I'm talking about using it as a more of a style type of tool. Well, as I said, a stylistic type of choice, and I'll give you an example. So the students, each of whom looked proud and determined, lined up in the streets to vote for the presidential candidates. So you can see I've got the hyphens on either side of this phrase. I use the hyphens here because I kind of want to have the reader stop. Like, it's almost like a bit of a pullback. Like, I guess you can hear it in my voice. So the students, each of whom looked proud and determined, lined up in the streets, so forth and so on. You could also use commas here because it's an interrupting phrase, and we could pull it out and the sentence would still make sense. So that's why I said that hyphens are usually a stylistic choice. I use them here in place of commas, and it's a harder pause than a comma. So now we're adding a fourth level of pausing into a sentence, I guess. But this is I would say this is like the hardest level of pause besides a period. So it's really, period is the strongest, and then you've got the hyphen, and then you've got a semicolon, and then you've got a comma. So this really, in essence, is emphasizing this phrase. That's the best way I can say it. We use hyphens to emphasize a phrase. Another quick example, everyone can learn how to write, even if they don't believe it. So again, I'm using this as kind of a pullback just to emphasize, even if they don't believe it. Everyone can learn how to write could be its own sentence. So I could actually place a comma here. Any questions about hyphens? Oh, so as I said, with a dash, you're just doing one keystroke. When you want to do a hyphen, the correct way is 2 keystrokes. And Microsoft Word will format this for you. I'll show you what it looks like. But you've got to type it a certain way to actually get it to work for you. So this is my example. And then when you want the hyphen, you have to do 2 of the little dashes. So again, I just did example, 2 dashes. Here it is. And I don't know if you saw that, so I'll do it one more time. But the PowerPoint program automatically connected those 2 dashes and elongated them. So example, dash, dash here. And then as soon as I hit space, The formatting just happens. And it is correct as is. You don't add a space before or after the hyphen. It's supposed to be completely connected. And last but, any questions before I jump into the quick library information?
So hyphens are basically just commas. How do you like use a hyphen? Like how do you like you explain like for the commas like sentence to the like how do you
Yeah, yes, they are basically commas, but they're like the cousin of commas, I guess you could say. So there's never a time in writing when you are required to use a hyphen unless you're connecting a compound word. Again, and let me type a quick example of that. Compound word such as like, well, I use the example well prepared. So this type of hyphen, in order to make a grammatically correct word like well prepared, those are required for words that need to be hyphenated. The kind of hyphens that we're looking at in these examples, they are never required. They replace commas and they're just a stylistic choice. They read differently. That's one of the best ways I could explain it. So as you start to really grow in your writing and you begin to find like your voice in your writing and you want your reader to hear you in a certain way, hyphens and semicolons are tools that you have available to make the writing sound the way that you want it to sound. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank
Oh,
you.
okay, you're welcome.
This is Jose.
Hi, Jose.
Yeah, I personally use this style of writing, particularly, let's say, if I have to give like a speech or something like that. I've noticed for myself, I have a tendency to do the hyphens just to break up the sentence and make a better delivery of what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and it's funny because, like you said, if you're doing, because you said you would use it if you're doing a speech, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and that connects really well with what I said. Like, it's about how it sounds. It's about the way the reader hears it in their head, and that's why I use the phrase like it's like a pullback, and that doesn't make sense unless you think about how it sounds. And when we're speaking, we kind of have that hesitation and we pull our voice back a little bit when we're reading the material that's in between the dashes. Um, so yeah, I use it a lot too. I think the more advanced that you get in your writing, the more you want to start using these kinds of stylistic tools.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I'm going to jump into using the IUN online library. And while I navigate there, I'll just kind of repeat what I said on Tuesday. You want to use this library when you can. I'm a huge fan of researching online as well, like just using Google searches for things. It's definitely easier, I think, like, and you get so many more results. And usually what you find on Google is more readable and accessible than what you're going to find in the library. But you're in college to grow and learn and deal with more complicated material. And you're not going to find more complicated material on the internet. And a second reason is, at least for me, when I'm using just Google or even Google Scholar, I might find what looks like the perfect article and then I don't have access to it because it's part of a medical journal or something like that. But usually, if I go into my Canvas account and access the library, then I'm seeing that I can access that particular journal. So I can get the text that I needed to get. So my recommendation, all that being said, is use both. Use Google, use whatever search platform you like, use Google Scholar, whatever, but also use the IUN library and get familiar with it, especially since most of you guys are pretty early on in your studies. You will be better off for understanding that the library, the online library, is easy to use and it's a wealth of information. So I'm going to switch to student view. You should be able to access the library right in any of your classes right here through library resources. And it will usually ask you to open in a new tab. And it should take you right to the search bar. So I've got some of my previous searches. I have history of opium, right? So I was working on editing a nonfiction book about narcotic addiction, and there was a chapter about the history of narcotics, which means I needed to learn about opium. So you type in whatever you want. Your way of searching here is the same way that you would search on Google. It can be very broad and vast. You can use those Boolean search terms if you're familiar with that system, or just try a bunch of different phrases. I usually, well, I'll always select available at IUN Northwest. That's selected for you. And then I select full text because I don't want stuff on my search list that I don't have access to the full text of, because then I get frustrated. Why is it there? So I'll select those 2 items and search. And now I've got a full page. I'm just scrolling down to show you that I've got lots of results, 7, 8, 9, 10, just on the first page alone. Maybe it's putting them all, no. So I've got more than 5 pages. I've got 50 results on the first page. And if I go back up to the top, you know, I can probably eliminate this one because I think it's in Turkish and I can't read Turkish, but I've got the second opium war ends. HTML full text means I can access it. So let's just take a quick look at that one. Of course, I have to sign in, but I am signed in. I wouldn't have been able to get here in the first place if I wasn't signed in. So that's slightly annoying, but okay. So all I had to do is click sign in, and now I've got access to this entire article, which is pretty awesome. Questions about how to get to the library, how to use the library? The main benefit of using the library and kind of forcing yourself to, anytime you have to research, like do the Google search and do library search, is because everything, all 50 of these on this page and everything else, oh look, I've got 117,000 results. Every single one of them is a credible source. So if you access it through the library, you don't have to question whether or not your teacher is going to say it's a credible source or not. It is. It just already is. It wouldn't be in the library if it wasn't. So that's kind of the, I guess, one of the real pros of doing some research within the confines of the online library. And guys, that wraps up the content that I wanted to present to you today. If you feel like that was good and you're good to go, you can go ahead and sign off. If you have questions, you can stay around and ask them. Have a great afternoon, and I will see you guys or talk to you next Tuesday.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
So for assignment, the opposing views, it says to submit assignment without indicating what side you are on, but for page 41 says to write some position that you actually hold on the topic. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I think so. Hold on. Let me grab my book really quick. Give me 1 second. Okay, so let's see. On page 41, says write a summary of some belief that you strongly disagree with, then write a summary of the position that you actually hold on the topic.
And then for your assignment, you said submit your assignment without indicating which side you are on. So I was confused about what to do.
So I accidentally closed the book. So you as the student reading the exercise on page 41, you know if you agree or disagree with the belief, but the instructions are actually saying write a summary of a belief that you strongly disagree with, then write a summary of the position that you actually hold on it. So you're going to be writing a paragraph that summarizes what you disagree with, and then a paragraph that summarizes what you agree with. So as an example, I'll use gun control since that's off limits. If I was using gun control as my topic, I would have a paragraph that summarizes why we should have fewer laws and regulations for gun control, and then a paragraph that summarizes why we should have more restrictions for gun control, or maybe even no guns allowed at all, right? If I wanted to go extreme. So then I've got a paragraph pro gun control and a paragraph anti gun control. And you just wouldn't indicate which one you actually believe.
Oh, thank you. I was so confused. I was like, what do you mean? So that's why I attended the class, just to ask that question.
No, and I can see where that is kind of confusing just because of the way that the assignment, the way it's worded in the book and then the way that I worded it in the assignment, like I can see where it's confusing. Yeah, so, and for those of you who are here and listening, don't necessarily make your first paragraph the one that you disagree with, right? We don't want everybody to start with the disagree and then have the second paragraph be the agree, because it'll be easy to tell if everybody does it the same way. So try to mix it up, or, yeah. Any other questions I can answer for you, May?
No.
Okay.
Hi, this is April.
Hi, April.
Hey, so I wanted your help with like basically coming up with my research question, because I just don't know how to put it in the form of a question that's like not too like straightforward, like yes or no. So I don't know if you remember, I was talking about basically like the differences between being a stay-at-home mom or being a mom that works. I don't know how to like turn that into like a good like controversial like question.
Sure. Okay. Let me, I tend to think best on a document. So it's funny, so many people hate writing and I struggle to even think without writing. So
Yeah, that is a little weird.
I guess it's just what I do so often. So let's see, like, what is better, staying at home or working and childcare? So if we go in like this, that's just where my mind goes. So then if I think of like maybe some supporting questions, I would think about, is childcare harmful for kids? Do kids who are raised at home do better in school, maybe,
That's a
than,
good one. That is a good one.
yeah, I think that, yeah, that might be a really good one. Or I guess kind of taking that in a little bit of a different direction, like maybe do kids who go to childcare have trouble bonding with parents? So I remember years and years ago, a friend of mine no, it wasn't a friend of mine babysat for her sister-in-law, and her sister-in-law worked like 10-hour days, and the little girl started calling my friend mom, and she didn't want to leave when her actual mom came to pick her up at 6 o'clock because she was spending like 10 hours with my friend, and that was who she latched onto, and that's who she wanted to be with. So that's another good question. But those are really kind of critically looking at childcare. So I think there's the whole other side of it, like the pro women going back to work. Like, how do women benefit from returning to work after kids? Because I think that's a super valid topic to talk about too. Because women sometimes can be like heavily criticized for wanting to go back to work and not stay at home with their children, especially if it's an option, like if they're choosing to go back to work, but they could afford to stay home. Yeah, they can be heavily, heavily criticized, which is not okay. So you could think about that as well.
That's more so like the direction that I was going for, was more so like the like effects on the, I mean, obviously the effects on kids was like, I picked that topic because that's going to be way more that I can talk about, but the main focus was like the effects on like the women's perspective of it, and like how they're like perceived from like everyone else. Like, how does the world look at working moms, or how does the world look at like single moms or stay-at-home moms? Like, that's where I was like more so going. So I think that would be.
Yeah, so, okay, so that one, I think, actually, I think it's probably a better direction to go in. Honestly, what you're talking about now, not better, but it sounds like that's what you're more interested in. And it might be more interesting to write about. Off the top of my head, so sometimes I'll switch from like writing and brainstorming into Google. I need Google help. And I'm going to come at it from the opposite direction. Why women who can afford to stay home with kids should, right? So that's a really critical, why you should stay home with kids. You can always go back to work. Well, what if I want to go back to work now? Could be less stress. Obviously, it's not less stress if that's what I want to do. Might be easier on the whole family. What about me? Won't miss the milestones. I don't care. I want to go to work. I can't get the time back. Again, I want to go to work. I'll have time at home. Yeah, so it's interesting to see, like, and we have to look at the source, Verywell Family, right? So this is all like, if you were a woman who wanted to go back to work and you came across this article, it's horrible. Like,
Exactly.
it's a guilt trip. Staying at home is rewarding. I don't think it's rewarding. Okay. So brainstorming back into our questions. As you kind of said, why does society criticize women who want to go back to work? Society should be more supportive of women who choose to return to work. So this last one is kind of like an emerging thesis statement. Like, this is kind of your argument, if that's what you're arguing, right? So this could be it. So you've got your two opposing points are slash something along these lines is where your research question would then like pick at these two conflicting statements. Does that make sense?
Definitely. I'm just writing.
Okay. I'm trying to see if the question will just pop into my head.
Yeah, I've been like, that's what I've been working on. And I just like can't find the question. I mean,
Well,
I am liking the why does society criticize women who want to go, I like that kind of like sums up what I was going for. But if you have if anything else like pops up for you, for sure let me know. I'm open to any suggestions.
this question in and of itself would be more of a supporting question, because if we ask this question, why does society criticize women who want to go back to work? We can look up information and report back that information, but we don't necessarily have a controversy within that question. So we need a question. We need a question that could be answered by either one of these two statements, is kind of what you're getting at, to try to formulate that good research question. So it's almost like, well, I guess we could just rephrase it. Should mothers be required to stay at home with their children for a prescribed amount of time after birth? That's a good starting research question. So should mothers be required to stay at home for a set amount of time after birth? And then that's going to allow you to start asking questions like this, and also, I guess, prudently, how would that even work? I financially, like, would we set up like could we guarantee women that they could go back to their jobs after that certain set amount of time? And of course, we'd have to support them financially because not everybody can stay home. What would what would the time frame be? I think this is a really good start.
Okay.
Yeah, and no matter which way you argue, like however you're going to end up feeling and wanting to argue, this is like a good provocative question.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Alrighty, I will be signing off. We will see you. I'll see you on Tuesday.
Sounds good. Have a good weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hi, I'm Caitlin.
Hi, Caitlin.
So, for the past 2 days, I've been kind of struggling on settling on a topic. I have a couple, and I wanted to read you my main one that I wanted to do, and I went and got a couple more just in case you thought the main one wasn't like good enough.
Okay,
So,
sure.
It was, is it worth getting into the music industry and ending up in the Illuminati?
As I heard, they got a little bit blurred out at the end. I heard, is it worth getting into the music industry?
And ending up into the Illuminati. So I didn't know how to word that correctly. But I know that some, music people or artists that get into the music industry, and I know a couple people, so I did get some like feedback from them as well, that is a completely different world when they try to get into the music industry. And I know that the cult of the Illuminati had tried to basically ask them to join them, and so it's just in my opinion a wide variety of a topic to talk about.
So it's hard for me to necessarily give a really good opinion just because I'm not super familiar with I am familiar with the word Illuminati, and I kind of know what it means because I read a very popular book that talked about the Illuminati and how it's like a cult. But it was a very long time ago that I read that. So I'm not super familiar with the connection with like the music industry and the Illuminati, although I guess now that you say it, I'm not unaware of something like that. So starting out with an idea like, is it worth getting into? That's not quite phrasing that works. Like, I guess, is it worth? Yeah, that's controversial. I would lean more toward rephrasing it though, like, so for whatever reason, Justin Bieber is like in my head when we're talking about music industry. And and I'm thinking of him as like what, a 13, 14-year-old kid when he first hit the music scene really big. So obviously his parents were definitely allowing it and behind a lot of his arrival on the scene. So I'm wanting to rephrase it like, should parents of young emerging music artists allow their children to pursue that path? Like, is it a responsible decision as a parent to allow a minor to enter that world? You could start to go in that direction. Does that make sense, or does it help?
Yeah, it does. That
Okay.
Oh yeah, okay, that does.
What are some of your other topics, if you want to share those?
The other one, well, I don't know how to word them per se, so I just kind of jotted all my ideas down. My other one was, this one's kind of scrambled. Is it okay for a mom? Basically, is it right for a mom to separate her kids from the father? Because I know for a situation, for instance, my friend is going through a separation, and he's not a deadbeat father, and he's been trying to contact his kids and talk to his kids, but the mother is such a bitter person that she's completely cutting all contact and telling the kids that your father doesn't love you, etc., etc. So would it, like, I guess I didn't know how to word it, like, is it okay for him to cut off all separation, or is it right, or could the mother, like, because I know for some situations in the court that the mother sometimes always gets kind of liability, because it's the mom. But
Yep.
then it's like, even though the father have a completely steady home and ask the kids to come home and et cetera, but then the mom could be out doing drugs, etc. So it's just, I didn't know how to work that one, but yeah, that's kind of my point of that.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good one. I think there's a lot there. And I process it similar to how I processed the other topic that we were talking about, that your classmate was talking about. So like the topic here in my mind, based on what you said, would be like father's rights. And then the question is almost like, should fathers have equal rights / like full joint custody as a rule?
Could you share your screen?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
Yep, I'm typing and not sharing. Okay, here I am. Should fathers have equal rights and full joint custody as a rule? And that would lead to like, questions like, what are the governing rules from state to state? Are they consistent from state to state? And I already know the answer. I know they're not consistent from state to state, but I wonder how far apart are there? Like, I know there's some states where fathers are like better, like they have a better chance of getting joint custody or having access to their kids, where others favor the mother like extremely.
Right.
So yeah, I think you could start with a simple question like, should fathers have equal rights, full joint custody as a rule? Because kind of again, like with this last topic up here about women returning to work, we have two conflicting statements. Like A is fathers should have full joint custody, and B is really just kind of obvious. Mothers should always have full custody and fathers visitation only, unless mother is unfit, which is really what, like as you described, what we do see a lot of today is a preference for the mother. It's really hard to prove a mother unfit, and then the father very often gets screwed. Yeah, so that could work. That might be easier, if I'm being honest, for you to write about than the other topic, just because research wise, like, I feel with the first topic, you might find yourself struggling to find research. With this topic, you're gonna struggle to weed through how much there is. Like opposite ends of the spectrum, there will be no shortage of articles on this topic.
Could we also, I guess, put testimonies in our paper, or like
Yeah.
since we know someone, could I guess put part of his story in the paper?
Yes, you can. And that's something like as we progress through the class and we actually do start working on the argument paper, that's something that I will talk about, that you can include, like if you know someone, as you described, who's going through a situation that's related to what you're writing about, you'd interview them. So you would include them as an actual source in your paper. And that's the same as getting a newspaper article that interviewed somebody. It's just a firsthand interview.
Okay, that works out. That helps me a lot. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, and that it does make it makes the paper a lot more interesting, actually, when you can bring in a source like that. So
now I have so many ideas going on in my head. Thank you.
good. You're welcome. That's a good thing.
Right. I know. I was honestly stuck. I was like, gosh, I can't think of anything. And then I just blurted out a whole bunch, and then I couldn't find the niche of it or the grasp of the questions.
Yeah, sometimes it really helps just to kind of like back and forth it and like talk about it, I think.
Right. Yeah, it does. It did. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Have a good afternoon.
You too.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
We're here to talk about an option to talk about our topics, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So today I was just looking through the internet, like what are like controversial topics, because I really don't pay attention to them. And
Okay.
then it was like one of those things where it was like it's right in my face what the problem was, like Zoom,
Okay.
because I have like a hard time, trying to stay positive and motivated about it. So today, like, my thesis was what did I say? Oh, let me go back to the assignment. I forgot
Sure.
what I said.
Sure. Go ahead.
Assignment. Is online learning affecting our mentality? Like, remember when I was talking to you about mentality and stuff?
Yes.
That's why I chose, like, is online learning affecting our mentality. And then so I was saying in that assignment, dang, where'd it go? What did I say? Like, the reason why I was interested in that topic, because I do wonder like how everyone was dealing with it, because I know some kids in my high school, they depended on going to the school because like they were safe and like they could eat there, study there when there were like bad times at home. And I was thinking about interviewing my classmates, like to ask them like, hey, like what happened like during your time of online earning. I was gonna ask you if I could do that, like interviews, so I can get sources from that too.
Yeah, sure. So I think there's definitely something there. If we think about it, can you see my screen okay?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay. So the way that I would think about it, so initially you said like, how has online learning basically in COVID time, right? Because that's why we're in this situation, impacted students. And we can say so that's pretty open. And if we want to make it more controversial, we could say the required shift to online learning has left many students without a reliable place to study, eat, socialize, and even feel safe, right? So that's kind of like an emerging thesis statement already. So to kind of get to so that the opposite of that would be, the shift to online learning allows students more time to work, raise a family, and eliminates the need to travel and those, let's say, related expenses, right? So there's kind of like your side A and side B. Like online learning is bad because it's affected students negatively. And here we have like B, online learning is good because it has these positive aspects. So really, I would say if you're thinking about these along these lines and like thinking about interviewing classmates and whatnot, you definitely want to make sure that you're focused on college students, because if you start bringing in high school or younger age students, the topic becomes insanely broad, like not manageable, because there's just so much going on with K through 12 and online learning. So
Right.
if you wanted to focus on college students, and is that what you had meant when you first started talking about it?
Yeah, so I wrote like my audience should be focused on teachers, students, and parents. That's what I wrote at first. It's just an idea,
Okay.
but my main audience is students. So yes. college
Okay.
students.
Yeah, I do think this works, and I think it's actually really interesting. I it's not something I've actually thought a whole lot about, but you saying that like people who have really kind of suffered because they lost campus as a safe place to be for the day because of bad
Yeah.
situations at home. Yeah, like that's really interesting, and it's really important, and it's really current. So yeah, I do think it's a good topic.
Yeah, because like I thought about it because I actually know people that really depended on school as like their safe haven, and like one of them will talk to me and say like what would they say, like, yeah, like I really come here because they have like the Crimson cards, you know, and like they'll use that, to eat there or like get
Yeah,
some drinks and stuff like that, and they'll stay there for hours to do their work, and then they'll wait till nighttime to go home.
yeah, just because it's
It's stuff
a
like that.
yeah, yeah, like I said, I'm just kind of like in my mind, like, wow, like I can't believe I haven't thought about that. I mean, I guess because it's not my situation, it hasn't been something that I thought about, but I think it's really important. I think it's a really good topic.
Right. Yes, that's what. Yeah, because I was like really thinking about it. I'm like, and then so I just thought of like, the situation was like literally in my face. So I was like, I'm gonna just write about like what's going on in my face, basically.
Yeah, I think you should go with it. The one thing I want to make sure I stress is that you have to keep in mind that your ultimate goal is that you have to have a paper that is really exploring, like that's an argument. Like, so you're going to be looking for research that says like, hey, all this online learning is actually really good, and even when COVID's over, we should do a lot more of it because it's so beneficial. Like, so you're going to be researching that as well and looking at that opposite side of the argument. And of course, you disagree with that. You feel like, actually, no, we need less online learning. We need to go back to how it was after COVID as soon as possible because we've taken away something really important for many, many students. So just keep in mind that your purpose is to explore both sides, even though you know what you think already to some extent. Don't forget about giving some time to the other argument as you start researching.
Okay. All right. All right. Thank you
Uh,
so much.
You're very welcome. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you.
No problem.